But this is Sasha Stair, and for everybody that's joining us, one of the cool things about Sasha is that she is incredibly accomplished, but she's also incredibly real. And when I say she's incredibly accomplished, she's got, I'm going to read off my notes because I'm not great at memorizing this kind of stuff, but she's an executive coach. She's a keynote speaker. She does speaking engagements all over the place. She has 20 years of sales and executive coaching experience, mortgage fintech, like just amazingly broad. And you happen to be a 3-time international best-selling author. And that's huge. I mean, that's with all the books out there, the fact that your #1 best-selling book, The Inside Job, Master the World Within to Lead the Future of Corporates, like that's huge. And so what I also love about you, whenever I went and I did, I didn't do a super deep dive, but I went and I looked to see what people say about you. And the word that comes up over and over again is dynamic. And that is amazing because Sasha is also incredibly real about the fact that she comes from a background of trauma. She shares openly the challenges that she has. She shares openly when things are going great, but also when they're not going great. And the fact that you so openly and gracefully own that, but then also consistently bring that dynamic energy. And as you just said, when things are going rough, and that's life. Life is going to go rough. That is, we were talking earlier about how people tend to hide from it so much. But to remain dynamic in the ups and downs of life that's a superhero power. I mean, that's amazing. So where did that come from?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. It's probably a culmination of things. My mom would say I'm a little bit of her mother reincarnated. She was a pioneer of her time. They actually immigrated through refugee camps from former Yugoslavia into America. My mom was born in a refugee camp in Germany before they even got here, right? So my grandmother, who I sadly never met, she passed away 10 years before I was born from breast cancer. But my mom tells me stories about her, and she was apparently very dynamic and also had this uncanny ability to just dive into any project, any venture. And my mom called her Midas, like everything she touched turned to gold. So I'm sure there's some that blood is running through my veins. My mom's also a music teacher, and she put me in everything you could imagine as a kid: showstoppers, theater, tap dance, ballet, like all of it. So maybe being on stage my whole life taught me to be more open and charismatic. And I don't know, the rest of it's probably just a little bit of nurture and nature, and the fact that my personal personality is positive. And before I even started looking into on my own through studying and reading about positivity, I just felt better being positive. And, when you go through a significant amount of hardship from a young age, I think you have a choice. You can, choose to sit in it and wallow it, or you can choose to find the bright side and see the good in the situation and learn from it and grow from it. And then as time has gone on and I've actually read about that and learned about it, I realized, like, oh, people who are more positive live on average 10 years longer. And our ability to be productive and fulfilled and happy is expanded by being more positive. So now it's like, okay, double down on that. Why not?
Yeah, that's huge. I didn't know that. That's kind of
Yeah.
well, and I find that it makes the quality of my life much better. I've
Absolutely.
had times where I saw the positivity. I've had times where I didn't see the positivity. I had an accident, I guess we're going on almost 12 years ago now. And I was hit at a peach festival by a driver from behind
Oof.
and did some major damage. I had to go through a lot of surgeries. I had to relearn how to walk. The
Gosh.
worst part was that it did major damage back in here. And I had a migraine straight from within like a couple hours after the accident for the first year and a half.
Mm.
And it wasn't until I had the nerves removed in the back of my head that I got some relief. And then they do injections around here and all through my neck and shoulders every 8 weeks to keep the sensation gone.
Wow.
Um, but that was, I came from a tough upbringing and I experienced a lot of trauma, but that was one of the first ones where my mindset, I kept thinking, okay, I'm gonna stay positive and see my way through this. And then as it continued, my mindset went further and further down. And eventually I got to a point where I thought, you know what, I'm never going to come back from this.
Mm.
And this is my life. And I can either continue to wait for it to get better, or I have to figure out how to make peace with this here now. And as you said, like once you make that mindset and to accept, okay, this is not ideal. This isn't my perfect world, but this is my world. And it's amazing how those mind shifts and, like you mentioned much earlier on, that just simple shifting of energy.
Mhm.
And it isn't instantly going to fix anything, but it does long term make such a huge impact.
Yeah,
So that,
it does.
you said you did that from the time you were young.
Yeah, I think for whatever reason, I just learned that perseverance
Mhm.
combined with persistence and patience is the way to go. And if you stick with something, if you want something bad enough, you'll get it. My parents probably are sitting in their homes wishing that I wouldn't have been so tenacious as a young child. Um, but yeah, you never know why you do the things you do, but as a kid, I was just such a risk taker, and I still am as an adult. And I think maybe as a result of dealing with a lot of adversity and also a lot of rejection younger on, I just built up that like mental and emotional fortitude. And that being said, I also didn't have all the skills I needed, which is how I ended up writing the book, because I got to a place where I realized, gosh, I still haven't learned all the skills I need to navigate through adversity. And I had a very unhealthy response to it. And so I had to go learn all these new skills in order to have a more healthy response to it. But yeah, I think for whatever reason, I just maybe, again, a little bit of nurture, a little bit of nature. It was innate in me from a very young age.
Well, but I mean, what a gift that is to be able to look at it and say, okay, where do I learn from this?
Yeah.
That my grandfather always used to say, whenever I would screw up, and I am a big fan of screwing up. I find that the best lessons come from when you shoot for something and miss, and you still make it further than you would have been if you just sat there.
Absolutely.
And he would always say, there's a lesson there somewhere. Don't
Yep.
lose it.
Yeah.
And it's what a great gift for you to have that from the beginning, to be able to be like, okay, didn't reach it. Cool. How do I get there?
Yeah.
That's
And
awesome.
it's interesting being like, I don't want to say older, it's not like that old, but you move along in your journey of life, I'll say, and in your evolution as a human. And just this last week, someone recommended I read the book, The Gap and the Gain.
Oh,
And I am still in the middle of it, but generally speaking, the visual you just gave is the concept, which is you could sit there and do nothing, or you could shoot the arrow. And let's say you miss the target, you still hit it, but you miss the bullseye. If you're in the gap, you're thinking about how far off was I from the bullseye and why didn't I hit it? And you're getting really down and hard on yourself for the fact
yes.
that you didn't hit that
Yes.
bullseye. If you're in the gain, you're thinking, well, I've never shot a bow and arrow before. So that was my first time. Good for me. I actually hit the target. Oh my goodness. And look at how close I got. And that mindset of just saying, I'm going to stay in the game. Like, how did I do great things in that moment? What did I learn from that? How
Yeah.
can I be better as I continue forward?
Yes.
That alone allows you to have an opportunity to more likely hit that bullseye the next time you shoot, versus you're probably going to hit the same place before or worse if you stay stuck in that gap mindset.
Yeah.
And so it's like, again, you have these innate abilities, but then you read books and you hear from other people, and it's like you kind of piece the dots together and realize that these concepts, they're not novel, right? They
Oh,
exist and people have studied them, and there's science to prove how our brain functions when we put it in a certain place and frame things a certain way. So I guess I feel blessed to not only have had that innate ability, but to be able to refine it listening to experts who have studied it over the years as well.
it's ironic. I was watching a podcast earlier today, and I will not tell you what the part of the brain is. I'll send you a comment with, but the part of the brain that they believe is what controls our longevity
Hmm.
grows every single time you do something you don't want to do. And
Hmm.
they have found that people that don't push themselves out of their comfort zone as much
Mm-hmm.
have shorter lives. And they're not certain if it's that this is the piece that actively controls longevity, or if it's doing things that are like, okay, I'm going to eat a salad, even though what I really want is an eclair.
Right.
So are those things, is it those day-to-day decisions of making the better, healthier choices? I'm going to go walk for half an hour instead of sit on my butt and scroll through social media.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the exercising that part of the brain makes you live longer? Or is it that that part of the brain becomes more exercised and becomes larger the more you exercise it? And they haven't yet decided what the correlation is, but they have found the more that you push yourself outside of your comfort zone, the more that you do the things that you initially don't really want to do because they are things that push you forward, the longer you live and the better quality your life is. And I love that
Yeah.
because it is easy to get in the rut of living in the safety zone. You know,
Right.
it's easy to live a small life.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary to reach for things that you've never done before. It is I'm starting a podcast. I know nothing about podcasting. Yeah,
You
like,
know more about microphones than I do, apparently.
girl, no, I don't. I went to my friend. I have a good friend who's the podcaster for the Army. And I went to her and I said, tell me what I need. And she was like, these 5 things, get these
Yep.
5 things, and you're good to go. That is all I know is I ordered what she said to order. And John helped me hook it up because literally that is all. And I saw that when I don't have enough light, I look really like I look like a corpse. And so I was like, okay, that is all I know about podcasting. But I do know that everybody's got a really interesting story, and really successful people tend to have really amazing stories.
Yeah.
And it's easy when you're not feeling so successful or when you're in one of the low points in life. It's easy to look at everybody else and be like, well, why do they have so much more opportunity? Why do they have a nicer house? Why do they have a better car? Why did they have this, this, or this? And what I hope people get from this is to look at it and say, okay, this person came from these crazy, circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
What decisions help them get out of that hole? And what can I learn from that? Because lots of times we look at success and people tend to assume it's linear. They tend to assume that you start here, you do these actions, you end here, and boom, you're successful. And that ain't it.
Nope. My life's been like a pinball machine.
Yes, yes. But that takes courage. That takes courage to sit there and ride the highs and the lows. And when you're on the high, instead of being like, I am amazing, I mean, some of that's okay. But like, I am phenomenal. This is because I'm so incredible. And then when you do one of these, you're like, okay, why do I suck so bad now? And that's not the reality. The reality is this is where you learn.
Mm-hmm.
And what you learn here, you implement, and then it takes you up this path. And then
Mm-hmm.
to the point where you're kind of at a place where you need to learn a little bit more to take that next step up, like you mentioned earlier. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you peak at wherever you've reached the max of your capacity, and then you need another learning curve to
Mm-hmm.
get you to that next step.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes that tenacity, the perseverance. I loved it because you gave 3 P's. You said perseverance, persistence, and what was the third one?
Patience.
Patience. And that's huge because it is easy to get impatient. I think I'm
Okay.
super patient, but I think a lot of people are.
And there's beauty in being impatient as long as you can harness it, because the impatience means you're driven and excited if it's a healthy version of impatience. If it's an unhealthy version, you're anxious, you're desperate, right? And so I think it's really important to go, okay, I'm feeling impatient. Why am I feeling impatient? Be curious about it. And if it's because you feel the pressure or the weight, like for instance, I recently got let go. And so it's like, when I feel impatient about what's next in my career, is it because I'm worried about providing for my family? Is it because I'm worried about, what we're going to do, from a health insurance standpoint?
Yeah.
Or is it I've got some really cool opportunities that are starting to bake in the oven. And I'm like, get out of that oven.
Yes.
Like I'm ready
Yes.
to go. And
Yes.
either way, the impatience is serving. And the reason it is because it teaches us something about not only ourselves, but about where do we go from here, right?
Yeah.
If it's that more, I hate to use the words negative and positive, but I will in this scenario, that former example, a little bit more negative, then it's okay, how do I calm myself and realize everything's going to be just fine, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I've been reading a lot of Stoic writings recently, and they talk about, like, imagine the worst case scenario, and then when you realize it's not that bad, like, we have it really good, especially in this country. Most of us have it really, really good. Even
Yes.
at the worst, you'd still be okay. And when you know that, then you can go, okay, fine, I can not be so nervous or so impatient about this scenario. And then on the excitement version, it's how do I gain joy from that in between space, that time in between one point of my life to the next, the end of a chapter, the start of another one. And so often, I think we either jump from job to job or from relationship to relationship or house to house or whatever it might be. And those transition moments have so much gold in them. And we don't always allow ourselves to enjoy it because it's uncomfortable to be in that transition, right?
Yes.
That's not in our comfort zone. We like our steady Eddie, warm blankie. I know everything that's going to happen. I feel like I'm in control, which is obviously an illusion because no one's in control. And so I think people struggle to sit in those transition periods, but it's such a rich and ripe time for reflection and learning and thinking about how much you've already accomplished, what's ahead, and really being purposeful in how you want to move forward. And again, it's just that patience or impatience. There's always beauty and lessons in it. You just got to look for it and be curious about it.
Well, one of the things that you talked about that's interesting is I love to think about the analogy of a seed.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about a seed, a lot of what a seed does is done on blind faith. It's this little self-contained entity full of potential.
I love that.
And all it does is it sits there and it can sit there. They have planted seeds that came from the ice age,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of them will still sprout. And they've sat around for millennia just sitting in their potential. And they land in a fertile place and they start to get a little bit of water.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of gardeners, if you've ever gardened, you know that experience where, like, you've planted the seed and you're watering it and you're watering it and you're watering it. And you're like, there ain't a thing going
Nothing's
on.
happening.
Exactly.
And for the
And,
record, I have a brown thumb, so don't ask me anything
and
about
so
gardening.
you adjust the light and you're like, okay, is it warm enough? Is it like, what's going on? But you have two choices.
Mm-hmm.
You either say, you know what, it's dead, nothing's going on, or you
Mm-hmm.
continue to water it on blind faith. And if you keep watering it, eventually you'll see just the first little carpet of green.
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually the point at which people are like, but it takes several weeks to get there. And what we forget is during that time, you've got this little bundle of potential
Mm-hmm.
that is starting to come awake and
Mm-hmm.
starting to put pressure against its sides and starting to test the boundaries of whatever it is containing it. And if you stop watering it, then it goes from here and fizzles and dies completely.
Mm-hmm.
But if you continue to give it the things that you know based upon blind faith are the things that it needs, it will continue to unfurl and it will continue to spread out and branch out. And you have huge trees. You have the redwoods.
Mm-hmm.
They came from that same little bundle of potential.
Mm-hmm.
And the key is to remember that we all have so many moments of bundles of potential. And if you keep watering on that blind faith, you can do amazing things. You can create an entire forest of success.
Yeah.
But, and this is a big but, a lot of us forget about the patience piece. And we get so wrapped up in the fact that I've been watering this damn thing for a month
Yeah.
and I'm not seeing a thing. I got
Yeah.
better things to do with my life. I'm going to give it up. And that is usually the point. What I have found, the moment I have an absolute inability, when I've set my mind on a focus, I have an absolute inability to shift myself away from it. And I can tell you the times that I have had everyone around me say, this isn't going to happen. Like, it's okay to step away from this.
Yeah.
When the entire team has lost their faith and they are done, and I am the only one that's still moving towards that goal, it is usually right around the corner of happening.
Yep.
And it's, I could give you a dozen examples right now of times that major things have happened in my life after the point where people told me, I've had people say to me, Caroline, John, Caroline, you are no good at this. This isn't going to happen for you. It's okay to walk away.
Yeah.
Just let it go.
Yeah.
And that makes me water like that makes me super focused on watering because I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm going to show
I hit
you.
the competitive button. I'm going to prove you wrong.
Exactly.
Yep.
So I mean, like that patience piece is so critical, and I think a lot of people forget that.
Yeah.
And it's
I'm the same way as you, and I call it dog with a bone, right? Like I won't stop.
Mhm.
But I also think there's some value in, it's okay to say no to things if you feel like it's a no, but to trust your intuition and to learn to build that self-trust and that ability to listen to your inner voice and your intuition. Because if it says keep going, you keep going. And I have those same stories and times at companies, even just in my most recent role, where people were like, that account is never going to turn around. And I'm like, yes, it
Yes.
will. Give me
Yes.
time. Give me
Yes.
time.
Yep.
And then when it does, everyone comes back and goes, I would have bet so far against you.
Oh,
I don't know how you did it. I don't know what you did, but like you made a miracle happen. And it said, no, I was patient and persistent and I
yeah.
persevered against the odds. And I think to your point, most of those stories only happen when those people have enough grit and enough patience to push through the hardest times,
Yes.
and to get to that, to trust that like there is light on the other side, and I don't get to choose when and how it shows up, but if I keep at it, it will show up.
Yep.
When you have that blind faith, as you described it, eventually it does.
Yeah. I can't remember if it was Terry Bradshaw or it may have been Dick Butkus, but I heard this quote long ago, and I need to look who it is. I need to
Yeah.
look up who it said it because I attribute it all the time. But what he said is, you have never failed until you quit.
Yes.
And yes, and it's, for me, I've had to learn to be careful about what I throw myself at
Yeah.
because I am so focused
Sure.
and driven that I push things through that I'm like, well, that was dumb. Like that was not what I wanted. I thought that's what I wanted, and now I've delivered it, and that was really not.
Sure.
That was not. But it's amazing how even in major successes that you land,
Mhm.
there's going to be little setbacks the entire way through. And those little setbacks can be a failure if you allow them to be and walk away from the table. If you say, okay, nope, that is part of my process and that's great.
Yep.
What now? How do I keep it moving forward?
Yeah.
And that is a really great point. I love that of the power of patience.
Yeah. And those setbacks are lessons. Like, hopefully, you learned at least something new in that setback, and then you learn something new in the next one, and the next one, and then eventually you get it right. I
Yes.
think a lot of people use that story of Edison and how many, I think it was like
Yeah.
1,000 times until he figured
Yes.
out the light bulb, right? But he learned something at every single step of the way in order to eventually be like, okay, we're finally here, right? And I think the best inventors, creators, innovators of our time and of not our time were definitely people maybe a little bit mad in the head sometimes, but they
Yes.
didn't give up, right? They
Yes.
did not give up. They knew there was something there. They had that blind faith. And they saw enough evidence to go with that blind faith to say, I'm going to keep going until I figure it out. And then you figure it out.
And then like everybody, I think a lot of people are quick to recognize success,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not as quick to recognize the failures that you learn from.
Yeah.
And those are important to recognize as well, because nobody is always knocking it out of the park. I mean, you look at Babe Ruth's batting average, and no one is ever like, yeah, well, he struck out a good amount of the time as well. He's human. But when he hit it, he knocked the crap out of it.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that, failure is part of the process.
Yeah.
It's as important as any other step in the process.
Absolutely.
That's very cool. So tell me about becoming an author. I'm
Yeah.
very curious on this.
So I knew about maybe in my early 20s that I wanted to write a book. I don't know, I don't even remember why I decided one day. Sometimes I just decide I'm going to do things and then they
Yes.
just happen. And I started to write one back then and I never finished it. And it was always in the back of my mind and heart is like, okay, you said you were going to do it. You didn't do it. And I'm kind of same as you, right? That competitive nature, but also I made a commitment to myself and I want to follow through on it.
Yep.
And you trust a little bit sometimes that maybe it's not the right time.
Yeah.
And you kind of put it back in the toy box and say, "Oh, I'll pull it out later." And years later, a really dear friend of mine started a publishing firm and she called me and said, "Hey, I'm going to start publishing co-authored books and I'd love for you to write a chapter in the first book." And I was like, "A chapter? 2,500 words? I got this, right? That's no big deal." And so I wrote a chapter and then she had another book and she said, "You want to do it again?" And I said, "Sure." So I wrote another chapter and we got done with that book and I sat on it for maybe, I don't know, a month or two. And I circled back with her and I said, "You know what, Kaylee, I think I can write a whole book myself." And she's like, "Well, I've never done a solo author book, but let's do it together." And so she sent me a beautiful framework that allowed me to ask, or
Wow.
rather answer questions to help me think about what is the book? Why
Yeah.
does it matter? What's the message? Who's the audience? If I like could wave a magic wand and the people that read the book get these three things out of it, what are they? And
That's huge.
I chose to go. One of my favorite places on this earth is Maui. And I chose to go to Maui for a week. Kapalua Bay is my particular favorite spot there. And I just sat down one morning with a macadamia nut latte and watching the ocean and just said, "Okay, let's see what happens." And I got this automatic download. And I talked to a lot of authors that say they have the same experience where it's almost like your brain or whatever is going through your system is
Yes.
going so fast that your hands can't even keep up with those downloads that are like coming through you. And I framed it and started writing it. And 6 months later, it was done. And another couple months after that, it was published. I
That's
mean, it just
amazing.
came through so quickly and it felt so timely and divine. And I just did it.
I find that when things are meant to be,
Yeah.
you click into that flow. I love working in the flow. And
Yeah.
it's um I wrote a novel. It's been years ago now. I've actually written three. I've never published them.
Oh,
Um I
good.
had a miscarriage and I was devastated
Yeah.
and needed something to pour myself into because it was like such a shift for me.
Yeah.
It was like you go from all this buildup and potential and to go from that to nothing. And I
Yeah.
was like, I need, I didn't, as you said, I had always wanted to write a novel. I was always an avid reader, but I wasn't always certain I could write it. And it was
Mhm.
one of those exactly like you said, I tapped into that. I just would sit in front of my computer and it would just flow. And you're so right. When things are right, they just flow. It's so effortless and it's so fun. And I love tapping into those moments because it's just anything you touch is magic.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful place to be in. I love that space.
It is. And I want to talk more about flow, but before we do, I I didn't even think about it until now. But when I wrote that book, I had just gone through, I was in the middle of in vitro fertilization because I had fertility issues and couldn't get pregnant.
Mhm.
And I was just finishing a second round of egg retrieval when I went out to write it. And I had about 2 months prior, had my first miscarriage.
It is devastating.
It
It
is.
is. I think it's I think it's hard because like I didn't tell anybody. It's not until recently that I've even started talking about it. I had what, four in a row. And it is a lonely and heartbreaking place to be in.
Yeah.
And I got so much solace out of the experience of creating something. And
Yeah.
I think that's why I've never published, just it is such I wrote three novels in rapid succession. And, whenever people read it, they're like, oh, these are beautiful. You need to publish these. but I'm terrified because it is such a, so that took guts for,
Oh, and I wrote about the IVF journey in the book. So it's,
that takes guts to put it out there. Like
yeah.
that's kudos
But
to you.
thank you. And I shouldn't say but. I like the word and instead of but.
Hmm.
How else do we connect in this world but through stories?
Yes.
And if we're
So
not
true.
willing to share, I mean, it's great
Yes.
to share the joyous stories and the
Yeah.
happy moments, but if we're not willing to share the hard moments, I
Yes.
think we're missing. You talk about that bundle of potential in a seed.
Yes.
There is potential for such meaningful human connection if
Yes.
we're willing to go there.
Yes.
And it's been part of my strength, for better or for worse, that I allow people in so quickly because I want to get to that place of feeling so connected to you. I don't want to have a surface level relationship with anyone.
That is beautiful though. Like that's, and you're unique. It took me a long, it wasn't until my accident. I've always been someone that random people would share really personal information with, but I
Yeah,
never shared. And it took me a while to realize this. Growing up in abuse, you're constantly told that you're the reason that they do the things they do.
right,
That if you tell anyone, people are going to know that you are so bad that the
right.
people that are supposed to love you do these horrible things.
Yeah.
And so I grew up feeling a lot of shame
Mhm.
over the abuse and just the base level of neglect. I mean, my parents neglected just the bare minimum,
Mm.
but I also was deeply, deeply ashamed of it. And so I had this very beautiful facade. I had this very polished, I worked my ass off because I kept thinking, okay, if I get to a certain level of success, if I get to this level where my makeup's perfect and I have the perfect bag and the perfect house and the perfect car and I've got all of these things, then I will be better than the things that I came from. I will outgrow the horrible things that I represented. And it
Mhm.
wasn't until my accident where I lost the ability to maintain that facade. And I mean, like, I lost the ability to maintain any facade. I was just a raw, open, it took me down to the bare bones of who I was. And I realized in that it had never served me.
Mhm.
Living my life to maintain that facade had never served me.
Yeah.
But I also started to meet people who stood in their truth so openly and were really strong because of it.
Mhm.
And it has made me it like, yeah, I mean, it's not how I would have chosen to get to this place, but
Sure.
it's such a gift to get to this place because I now realize what a kindness you being open and me being open with our struggles is with other people because they look at accomplished people like you and they think, oh, she's perfect. She's got great hair. She's got beautiful skin. She's written a best-selling book. Like this woman, everything falls into place for her.
Yeah.
And it's, they don't realize that for every success in life,
Yeah.
there's an equal challenge. And both of those are what connect us as people.
Absolutely.
It's not about all these perfect people that live in this rarefied space and that life is so much better up here. And that was a mistake that I lived in for so long, was thinking, okay, once I get to the executive level, then I'm going to be happy. Okay, I'm not. Once I buy myself a luxury car and it's got to be the newest car every year or two, that's when I'm going to be happy. Nope. All right, well, if I get that Louis Vuitton, that's where I'm going to be happy. Nope. And in fact, I I have I can't bring myself yet to sell them, but like I collected all these really nice things that sit in the closet because
Yeah.
they don't fit who I am. And they never did. They never suited me. And what I've learned is that happiness is as much in these places down here where you connect with people and you really see eye to eye with them as it is up here where you're basking in the glory and you're like, yes, I am amazing. I'm so phenomenal.
Yeah.
So
The fulfillment comes from within, not external. And
yes,
that's a hard one to learn, to embrace, and to practice
yes,
because it's not just because you know that doesn't mean that you can live that every day. You have to be purposeful and intentional around believing this is where I'm going to be happy. If I'm settled and I'm at peace and I'm happy with where I am right now, who I am right now,
Yep.
even if I want to attain more, even if I want to be more, I can still be happy, grateful, and present. Then you will be fulfilled
Yeah.
because all that's here is the present, right?
Yes.
We
Yes.
live in a world that's hyper stimulated around all these external things that we, so to speak, want or need that we don't.
Yeah.
And we also live in a world of just this sense of urgency that's not real. And so we're constantly in that rat race, chasing after things. That book, The Gap and the Gain, also talks about the horizon always moving, right?
Yeah.
Like as
Yeah.
soon as you get
Yes.
to one thing, now you're on to the next because you never get to the horizon. It just keeps going and going and going. And it's a very vicious cycle that we can get into if we don't
Yeah.
pay attention.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that we can't use it again to motivate us and to drive us, but also we have to figure out what does fulfillment and purpose and joy mean for me, and how can I create that for myself every day, even if I am in a low or a valley versus
Yeah.
at the peak of a mountain right
Yeah.
now in my life, right? Even if I'm facing some of the hardest adversities I've ever had to face, I can still find that joy. I can still find the fulfillment. I can still find the peace in myself, but you got to look for it and you have to practice it.
Yes. And that's hard sometimes. It's really hard to remember that old adage of the only way to sink a ship is to let the water get inside.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, especially sometimes when there's like little bitty drips at a time, and before you know it, you've got buckets of water in the ship that you didn't even realize you were taking on because you were
Yeah.
so busy, making sure the sails were fixed, and making certain that the hull was painted and that you've mopped the galley and all these things, that you're not paying attention to the little bitty ways that the water is seeping in.
Yep.
And it's a daily practice as much as anything.
100%.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, let me see, look at that. So we are closing it. I don't want to run overtime because know it's Friday night and I don't want to hold you super, super long.
Oh, you're fine.
Um, is there anything that you would love to share that's been what you feel either a mentor or a major turning point, or that you look at life and you're like, wow, this is the thing where I learned so much about myself and about success from?
Yeah. It's a loaded question because there's been so many of those moments along the way.
Yes.
But the one I talk about most from an inflection point, and then I'll talk about the tools and resources that help me out of it, is the one I share in the book, which is, again, we talked earlier on in the conversation around, yeah, I probably had some natural affinity for being a more positive person and a courageous person. But also, I hadn't worked through my own traumas. And I know we didn't talk in great detail about those, but I went through molestation as a child. I went through 2 rapes as a young adult. I had an alcoholic father growing up. They're not interrelated, but that was a whole bucket of fun in and of itself. And I got to, a point where I got out of college and I'm in my first job, which was medical device sales. And I am just pedal to the metal and I am being super successful, but I have no idea how much unrest is going on inside of me. And
Yes.
so I'm sitting here in a role, again, not conscious of this, but subconsciously, what's going on in the back of my brain. I'm the only female. There's all these guys, and I had this chip on my shoulder of I'm going to beat you,
Yes.
I'm going to be better than you, and I'm going to win. Positive was I did, and I became number one in sales. Not only was I the only female, I was the youngest. Negative was I did it for all the wrong reasons, and I still wasn't happy when I got there.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so I got to that point, and I thought, well, great, now what?
Yep.
And I left because I was being harassed daily, not just by my colleagues, but by surgeons. And I just couldn't take it anymore. And I didn't have a mentor and I didn't have resources to help support me. And, the next job I took, we ended up in the crash of 08 and 09. And now I'm losing my job. And now I'm really at a low. And I got to a point where I almost took my own life. And I was probably 25 years old. And I didn't know it then. It took a little bit of time after, but eventually I got to a point, and thank God I did not take my life. But when I looked back, I realized it wasn't that I wanted to die. I just didn't want to keep living the life I was living. And
Yes.
I wish that I would have had anybody in my life that could have
Mm.
seen that or helped me. But
Yeah.
of course, I had that facade of being Wonder Woman. And so everyone thought I was fine. Everyone thought I looked put together. And I'll share a funny story about looking put together after this one. But I had to make a choice. And the choice I made was, you're not going to kill yourself. You're going to wake up the next day and you're going to go find a way to get out of wherever this place is that you are. And
Mhm.
I, probably not surprising, didn't put my toe in the water. I jumped into the deep end and I looked up everything I could. So I ended up with a life coach. I ended up with a therapist. I read every self development and growth help book I could find. I went on spiritual retreats. I went through Al Anon, which is the 12-step program for loved ones of addicts. And I just immersed and soaked it up like a sponge until I started to see, okay, there's different ways and different practices. And I just little by little put them in place. And then eventually that's what led me to write the book, because I wanted to share all that with the world to say, look, I'm not the
Yeah.
only one that's gone through this. Other
Yeah.
people might be sitting there going, where do I start? What do I think about? How do I think about it? And so, I wrote the book and moved on from there. But I really think that inflection point for me was the greatest moment of my life, because I chose to live. I chose life. I chose to keep going
Yes.
and say,
Yeah.
okay, this moment really, really sucks. And I don't like who I am and I don't like where I am, but I still have free will.
Yeah.
And, I can choose differently. And so you're going to get up tomorrow, you're going to choose differently. You're never going to look back. And that's exactly what I did. And I'm so, so grateful I did for so many reasons. So yeah.
That's that's huge. And
And then
yet,
I got to tell you the funny
go
story.
for it. Go for it.
So you talk about, oh, my hair looks nice. Thank you for that, by the way. But I got a text message this morning that was like, hey, can you jump on a video call in 3 minutes? And I was like, I literally just got out of the shower. I had gone to Pilates in the morning. So I'm sitting there going, well, I can get on a video call, but I'm not going to look very professional. And so I said, are you okay with the fact that my hair looks like a wet rat and I've got no makeup on? And the person, and mind you, I'm going to be meeting with two very prestigious people, and I hadn't met one of them. I'd share more if I could, but I can't share the details right now. But the person who texted me said, we don't care, hop on the call.
That's
And
all.
so I said, screw it. And so I, threw on clothes quickly. In 3 minutes time, I was on video, and the first words out of my mouth were, well, my middle name is Authenticity, and here I am. Because I legitimately was like, if there was ever a time for you to see me in my rawest and rarest form, it is no makeup, and my hair was definitely not as pretty as it is right now. So but I tell that story, it's somewhat to be flippant and somewhat to be serious, of like, be raw, be
Yeah.
vulnerable, be
Yeah.
authentic. People love that. They want it,
Yes.
they crave it in this world,
Yes.
especially where
Yes.
we have so much out there in the media, whether social media or regular, that
Yeah.
is just perpetuating everything that's not real.
Not real. And
People need this more
yes.
than anything, and more so now than ever.
Well, and they talk about how we are in a deficit of connection. People are
Oh
desperate for
God,
connection.
yes.
And the tough thing about connection is that you have to be willing to be real and be vulnerable. And it's
Absolutely.
scary. It is scary to be real and to stand in your truth. And, you know, I remember thinking, if I let down, like, I'm never going to have anyone who likes me, because I can't keep up the facade anymore.
Yep.
And I have no choice but to be true and to be open and honest. But no one,
Yeah.
if this is, it's not pretty. And
No.
that's
And
what the reality is, that like people aren't pretty. Like, it's, life is not pretty. It is not clean. It is not sanitary. It is messy, and it is real, and it is hard, and it is beautiful, and it is chaotic.
yeah.
And and that's what makes it so so amazing and so magical.
Yeah. And if you take the risk and you put yourself out there, whether personally or professionally, it's not always going to work out the way you
Oh,
think or the way you
oh,
want. And you have to be willing to accept that and
yes,
trust that it's still okay. And
yes,
I have spoken truth to power many times in my career and ended up without a job because of it. And you know what? Then that place was not my place. That's
no,
not where it was meant to
no.
be. And I always loved, and I'm terrible like you at remembering who wrote the quotes, but bloom where you're planted.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
if you're not growing where you're planted, then perhaps you just need different soil.
yeah,
And so, the right people and the right jobs and the right experiences will happen if you stay true to yourself. And the
yes.
ones that aren't meant for you will fall away, and you have to not get attached to them, and you have to trust that it will be fine. It will be
Yes.
okay.
Yes. In one of my interviews the other day, I was talking with a woman who has created a successful business out of creating like essentially online moms groups. And
Mm,
she said that the thing exactly what you just said, she said, it's crazy because I lost some of my closest friends
mm,
because I realized early on that to create a community, I had to be ready to be open and raw and honest.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
we have so much glossy, Kardashian momming and like, people put so much facade out there. And she said, I early on realized that what resonated with people was when I was like, you know what, I've got puke in my hair. And if this child doesn't sleep soon, I'm going to, strangle her, like
yeah.
that kind of the truth and reality. And I lost two friends that I thought were sisters. I thought that the three of us would be friends until the end of time. And
Yeah.
I had my accident and they could not handle the fact that like I was no, looking at my life and assuming that it was perfect. And then when I started being real about how unperfect it was, they fell away very quickly and it destroyed me. I was crushed. I was heartbroken.
It's hard.
But what you said, you made the beautiful point of what it does is when you're standing in that truth, it lets the right people come in and stay. And your truth will resonate with the right opportunities, the right people, the right situations.
Yeah. And honestly, it's hard sometimes for us to realize this because I think we've been conditioned to take everything so personal. But
Yes.
if we can learn to almost take ourselves out of a situation and watch it like a movie, like watch our life like a movie, we start to realize, and I mean this in the most sincere way, that it's not us, it's what's going on for them. And
Yes.
that doesn't, just because something might not be about you doesn't give you free permission to be a narcissist or egomaniacal,
Yeah.
but it does help free you of feeling like you somehow did something.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it's the other person and what they're going through
Yeah.
that is preventing that relationship from continuing, whether personal, professional, etc. And it's not your responsibility to manage their emotional experience.
Yeah.
It's not your responsibility to manage whether or not they are or aren't in your life, whether they fit in your new life. You manage yourself. That's it.
Yeah.
And as long as you're doing that in a good way with good intentions and you're a wholesome person and you have integrity and good values and you're compassionate and you're kind and respectful, then you're in good shape. And the rest of it is like, let it be, right?
Yeah.
When it comes, let it
Yes.
come. When it goes, let it go.
Yes. And that is such a key mindset to keep in mind, which is life is fluid and
Mm-hmm.
relationships are fluid and situations are fluid and jobs are fluid. And if you focus so hard, there's the old saying of, how do you hold water? Water is so fluid. How do you hold it? Well, if you
Yeah.
grab a hold of water and you're trying to grab it, it's going to flow right through your hands. But if you
Right.
hold it with an open hand and give it space to sit and be still, you can carry water.
Yeah.
And relationship, all of the realities of the good things of life, if you're so busy grabbing hold of it and trying to clasp it to you, you can't hold on to it. But if you create a place for good things to fall and to settle into life, they will eventually evaporate. They may even run through your
Sure.
fingers slowly, but that's how you gather more of the good things to life, is to give them a place to settle and to stay with you.
Absolutely.
And it's also incredibly empowering, because that grabbing hold, trying to hold on, is a position of fear.
It is, and it's very constrictive.
Yes.
And it's talk about having, all this bundle of potential, but if you hold it in a box, it
Yes.
can't grow. And that's what that constrictive, controlling energy does. But when we create and hold space, and when we expand and believe in the potential, that's when there's more fertile ground for something to grow. You're no
Yes.
longer putting it in a box saying, hey, why aren't you growing? No, you're giving it space to grow.
Yeah.
Same concept. And I love that.
That's awesome. I love that. So is there anything else that you would like to touch on before we go?
I don't think so. This is a great conversation.
Been wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate John mentioning it. Like we were talking about the podcast. He's like, who you should really talk to is Sasha. And I don't spend a ton of time on LinkedIn. I find that there's a lot of people out there that are so performative and so surface that, and I also, it's not usually the space that I'm swimming in.
Yeah.
But every time I would log into LinkedIn, I would see your posts, and they were always like so insightful and intuitive, and you would make me think, and I loved it. And I'm thankful that he recommended that, because this has been amazing.
No, likewise. And I'll say this, if anyone is listening that gets discouraged by certain things, whether it's posting content or where you post it, for the longest time, I had so much self-doubt around everything I wrote and everything I posted. And, I'm like recovering perfectionist over here. Is it, the right message? Is it long enough? Is it too long? Did I miss something? Is there a typo? Are people going to think I'm crazy? And the more that I trust and the more I just pour myself into it, the more positive responses I get. And you just got to stick with it, and you can't look, right? I mean, I look at so many other people, I'm like, they get thousands of likes and I only get 12 or 40 or what, and it's like, who cares? Right?
Yes.
What matters is
Yes.
that you're putting yourself out there, you're sharing your gifts with the world. And I've always believed this: if it's one life impacted, that's more than enough.
Yes. I love that. That is so
Yeah.
true. And
So
it is, it's we all bring something to this world. We all have something to offer.
yeah.
And without fail, there's always someone who'll be doing better than we are at anything, at anything. And, as they say, comparison is the thief of joy.
Yes, absolutely. And there's no need to compare to anything but who you were yesterday.
Yes. God, I love that. That's
Yep.
awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, it has. I'm so glad you invited me, and it's great to get to know you. John's a very lucky man.
I mean, and I'm dead serious. If you ever want to do this again, or if you want to do an ongoing series, like, this was so much fun, and you've just got great flow. I love it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Likewise. And I'm excited for you and what's ahead. And listen, I've talked to a lot of people that have started podcasts, and you figure it out as you go. There's no one manual and there's no one set way.
That is my
You
approach to
just
life in general, is like, I'll figure out how to fly on the way down.
exactly. People
Just,
have written many books about podcasts, raising kids, selling, whatever you want. It still doesn't mean that it's exactly a blueprint you're going to follow.
no,
You
no.
got to pave your own way.
Without fail, people always, I get a lot of questions about like my social media following. And I'm like, here's the thing. Number one, I have no idea how I got such a big following. No idea.
Yeah.
But number two, any tips that I give you on how to be successful,
Yeah.
there's a handful of people out there who've done it doing the exact opposite. And
Yeah.
so you've got to just find what the groove that feels natural and comfortable for you, and see that through, and the growth will happen. It's that blind faith thing.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, thank you so much. I love this. I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. You too. It's a
And
long weekend, so it'll be nice.
I know.